In March 2011, Syrian forces arrested teenagers for spraying anti-regime graffiti. 4 years later, 8 foreign militaries were fighting inside the country. This was not random. It was a chain reaction. How did one nation's protests pull Russia, Iran, the United States, Turkey, and ISIS into the same war? The turning point is not where you would expect, and by the end, you will understand how Syria became the blueprint for modern proxy warfare. Power in Syria was never spread wide. From 1970, the Assad family built a fortress state. Ba'ath Party loyalists, security chiefs, and military insiders formed the core, while the intelligence apparatus watched every move. Economic lifelines flowed through patronage. State contracts, especially in oil and construction, consistently landed with regime-linked firms. Procurement audits revealed systematic overpricing, funneling billions into the hands of the elite. For most Syrians, opportunity meant navigating corruption or being locked out. By 2010, GDP per capita had dropped below $1,500. Youth unemployment soared past 30%. The official Gini index showed inequality climbing year after year. But numbers do not capture the pressure building beneath the surface. Between 2006 and 2010, Syria suffered its worst drought in a century. Wheat yields collapsed by 40%. Rural families, 1.5 million people, abandoned their villages for the outskirts of Damascus, Aleppo, and Homs. Cities swelled with the displaced, straining housing, jobs, and public services already crippled by graft. The regime's answer was more surveillance, more security spending, and less transparency. The pressure cooker was sealed tight, but the cracks were widening. The next decision, one made in a dusty southern town, would test just how brittle this system had become. On March 20, 2011, 3 teenagers, Mazen al-Khatib, Yasser al-Hamid, and Sami al-Bashir, were pulled from their classrooms in Daraa. Their crime? Spray painting a wall with anti-government slogans echoing the Arab Spring. Security forces beat them, then vanished them into detention. Their parents pleaded for answers. Silence. Rumors of torture spread through the town within hours. 5 days later, on March 25th, thousands marched from the school to the city center, demanding the boys' release. Police opened fire. 12 people were killed, dozens more wounded. Mobile phone videos captured the chaos. Gunshots, blood on the pavement, frantic shouts. Images raced through Facebook and YouTube, bypassing censors, igniting outrage far beyond Daraa. In a country where fear had always kept crowds apart, the deaths made protest contagious. What began as a plea for 3 sons became a rallying cry against decades of humiliation. The regime's decision to use bullets instead of dialogue shattered the illusion of control. The world watched as a local wound became a national rupture. Officers in other cities took notice, and some would soon face a choice: obey or defect. Lieutenant Colonel Nizar al-Qusayr faced an order: fire on unarmed protesters moving through Daraa. He refused. On June 3, 2011, he slipped away from his post, released a video denouncing the regime's brutality, and called on fellow soldiers to join him. His defection was not isolated. Colonel Riyad al-Abdallah and General Maher al-Sharif each left the army after being told to attack civilians. Their public rejections cracked the myth of a loyal, unified military. Within a month, former regime officers began organizing armed resistance. In July 2011, the first major action took place. In the town of Al-Kafr, a group of defectors now calling themselves the Free Syrian Army ambushed a regime checkpoint. They seized weapons, scattered government troops, and held the ground for hours. For the first time, the state lost territory to its own soldiers. Word spread fast. Videos of the operation surfaced online showing rebels in mismatched fatigues, wielding captured Kalashnikovs, and setting a template for hit-and-run tactics. The regime's crackdown had backfired. Instead of crushing dissent, it was fueling a rebellion from within its own ranks. The ranks of the FSA swelled with men who knew the army's playbook and could turn its weapons against it. Guerrilla doctrine of ambush, retreat, and blending in became the new norm. But as the FSA gained confidence, so did its need for outside support. The next phase would depend on who could keep the guns loaded and the fighters supplied. Weapons started flowing into Syria on a scale that dwarfed local supply. Flight manifests show more than 160 cargo planes, mostly from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, touching down in Turkey and Jordan between early 2012 and 2013. These were not humanitarian missions. Each flight offloaded crates of rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, and anti-tank missiles, destined for rebel hands. On the ground, Turkish logistics hubs like Bab al-Hawa became lifelines, with convoys of trucks crossing the border daily, some labeled as aid, others packed with arms hidden beneath food and blankets. But the money and guns came with loyalty. Saudi Arabia channeled support to groups promising a nationalist, anti-Iran line. Qatar favored factions with Islamist credentials, often at odds with Saudi-backed rivals. Each patron demanded loyalty, pushing rebel commanders to compete for resources. As a result, rebel unity shattered. Ideological blocs formed, each with their own flags, leaders, and foreign paymasters. Clashes broke out not just against Assad, but between opposition groups fighting over supply depots and smuggling routes. The more weapons arrived, the deeper the fractures ran. By late 2013, the opposition map looked less like a liberation front and more like a patchwork of mini-armies, each answering to a different capital. The logic of patronage had replaced the logic of revolution. The vacuum left by rebel infighting would soon become the opening for something far more ruthless. ISIS didn't just seize territory, it seized the means to wage war on a scale Syria hadn't seen. By late 2014, ISIS controlled at least 6 major oil fields in eastern Syria, including Al-Uhaib, Al-Jazra, Al-Maysal, Al-Ain, Shaddadi, and the prized Deir ez-Zor field. Production records recovered by intelligence agencies show daily output peaking at 150,000 barrels a day. Smuggling networks moved crude across the Turkish border, feeding a black market that paid in hard currency. At its height, ISIS oil sales brought in an estimated $1.2 billion a year, enough money to pay foreign fighters, buy weapons, and run a propaganda machine that reached from Raqqa to Europe. The group's financial windfall transformed the battlefield. ISIS fielded BMP-2 armored vehicles, technical explosives, and a steady stream of new recruits. Fighters poured in from North Africa, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and Western Europe, drawn by the promise of salaries and the vision of a new caliphate. Smuggling routes that once moved cigarettes and electronics now carried men and munitions. The group's territory stretched across about 13% of Syria at its peak, linking oil wells, refineries, and command centers in a network that defied easy assault. Global priorities shifted overnight. The fight against Assad took a back seat to the fight against ISIS. Western capitals scrambled to disrupt oil convoys and choke off funding. The United States and its allies shifted from regime change to counterterrorism, launching airstrikes on oil infrastructure and targeting ISIS leaders. The logic of the war changed, and as ISIS grew richer and deadlier, the world's focus moved from Damascus to Raqqa. No one could ignore the new reality. Oil, money, and violence had redrawn the map of Syria. The next move would come from outside powers determined to stop the caliphate's advance. Russian pilots lifted off from the newly fortified Khmeimim air base in September 2015, launching a relentless air campaign across western Syria. In just 30 days, Russian jets flew 4,800 combat sorties, an average of more than 150 per day, hammering rebel positions from Idlib to southern Aleppo. On the ground, Iran's Quds force and Hezbollah fighters converged, spearheading offensives that regular Syrian units could not sustain alone. Their target, critical supply lines and opposition strongholds threatening the regime's last urban footholds. The battle for Al-Qusayr became the proving ground. Hezbollah commanders, backed by Iranian advisors, coordinated with Syrian armor to encircle and storm the town. Artillery and Grad rockets pounded rebel defenses, while Hezbollah's urban warfare tactics broke the stalemate. By August 19, 2013, Al-Qusayr had fallen. The victory opened a land corridor stretching from Iran through Iraq and Syria to Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, locking in Tehran's vision of a contiguous Shia axis. Russian air power and Iranian-backed ground forces did not just halt the opposition. They reversed months of rebel gains in weeks. Satellite images mapped the regime's front lines surging eastward, reclaiming vital highways and border crossings. Assad's survival was no longer in doubt. The war's center of gravity shifted from local battlefields to the halls of Moscow and Tehran. But every bomb dropped and every corridor secured deepened the regional fault lines. The internationalization of Syria's war was now irreversible. August 2013. In the suburbs of Damascus, the world woke to images of entire families suffocating in their homes. The Ghouta chemical attack killed up to 1,400 people in a single night. Laboratory tests by the OPCW confirmed sarin gas had been used on civilians. The outrage was immediate. The United States had drawn a red line on chemical weapons. But when the moment came, Washington stepped back from direct military intervention, opting instead for a Russian-brokered deal to dismantle Syria's declared stockpiles. The message to every actor was clear. Red lines could be crossed if the diplomatic cost was high enough. Alliances began to strain. Turkey, once a partner in arming rebels, watched as the United States shifted its focus toward ISIS and began relying on Kurdish-led forces to retake territory. In June 2016, the Manbij offensive put United States-backed SDF units within 15 kilometers of the Turkish border. Ankara demanded a demilitarized buffer zone and joint control over border crossings. American officials, citing operational autonomy for the SDF, refused. Leaked diplomatic cables reveal Turkish threats to suspend cooperation and halt arms shipments. The rift deepened as Turkey saw the United States arming a group it linked to the PKK, a sworn enemy. The Ghouta attack and the Manbij dispute exposed the fault lines running through every alliance. No single coalition could hold. Each external power recalibrated priorities, making unified peace impossible. The war's logic was no longer local. It was locked in a cycle of foreign calculation and mistrust. The next confrontation would not be decided by Syrians alone. Syria's battleground is now a blueprint. Rival powers test weapons, alliances, and red lines, with civilians trapped in the crossfire. As proxy conflicts multiply worldwide, the war's logic spreads. Decisions made in distant capitals reshape local realities overnight. The next proxy war may already be unfolding. Whose story will it rewrite?